Retorno ao Escritório 2025, o que não estão a dizer. Explora a dinâmica em evolução do retorno ao escritório e o seu impacto na cultura de trabalho.
Okay, so let's just dive right into all this stuff about return to office.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's talking about it.
It really does. You've sent over a Deloitte survey. This time looks like focusing on chief legal officers, and then some pretty intense discussions from Reddit, Rouse Corp, and remote work. And then an article here analyzing RTO trends projected all the way out to 2025. So looks like you're looking for some serious insight here, and we are going to try to deliver it.
Let's unpack it.
All right, so first, why don't we start with this Deloitte survey? It really digs into how the role of the chief legal officer is changing.
Yeah, and I think one of the most interesting things is that CLOs are becoming more and more responsible for leading these big company transformations. Like the survey found that on average, they're leading or co-leading 5 enterprise-wide initiatives.
Wow.
Things like digital transformation or even something called legal entity rationalization.
Legal entity what now?
Haha, yeah, it's a mouthful. Basically, it's about streamlining the legal structure of a company. You know, maybe consolidating subsidiaries or dissolving entities that aren't really needed anymore, or optimizing the organization from a tax and regulatory perspective.
So making it more efficient.
Exactly.
So it's not just about contracts and lawsuits anymore. It sounds like CLOs are having to become strategic advisors on a whole new level.
Yeah, and another area where they're really having to step up is this whole world of generative AI.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Like all the legal and regulatory questions around intellectual property, data privacy, potential liability issues. It's a minefield.
Makes sense. AI is a really powerful tool, but there are a lot of risks that need to be managed.
And the survey found that CLOs are excited about the potential of AI for their organizations, but they also know about the risks.
Right.
There's a real need for clear strategies and for people in legal departments to really learn new skills to make sure AI is implemented responsibly and effectively.
So it's not just about using the new tech, it's about using it the right way.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's move on to all the anxiety around this return to office push. I thought that the ResCorp discussion was really interesting, particularly all the concerns about offshoring.
Yeah, and the Australian workforce seems to be particularly worried about this.
It seems like there's a real fear that companies are going to use RTO as a way to move jobs overseas. And, I mean, this fear isn't totally crazy.
Yeah.
One user shared a story about an enterprise architect who was laid off, took a 6-week vacation, and then was offered a higher daily rate to come back, but only because the job was being offshored.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's kind of like companies are using this weird time to their advantage.
Right.
They offer more money to some employees while they're also looking for cheaper labor overseas.
Yeah, they're kind of playing both sides.
So for workers, it creates this feeling of uncertainty, right? There's a chance to get paid more, but there's also the fear of being replaced altogether.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just happening in Australia.
Right, it's global.
It's a global trend, and
Yeah.
it's making workers in all sorts of different industries anxious.
So there are definitely valid concerns on both sides. But before we jump to any conclusions, why don't we look at this trend analysis article you sent over? It gives us a broader perspective on this whole return to office push.
Sure. Yeah, this article highlights a few key factors that are driving the trend, including the rise of hybrid work models, industry-specific preferences, and then, of course, how employees are responding in different ways.
Right, and it emphasizes that there's no one solution that will work for every company.
Right.
Companies are trying out all these different models, but communicating clearly, being flexible, and focusing on employee well-being, all of that is really important for it to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's key.
And while the article says that in-person collaboration can be good, it doesn't ignore the challenges,
Right.
like the fact that it costs companies more money, and then also there are health concerns for employees, especially during flu season or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And that actually leads us perfectly into the employee perspective, which was discussed in that remote work forum.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of skepticism there about the idea that RTO is all about culture.
A lot of users felt like it was just a sneaky way to force people to quit or to cut costs or to control employees who have gotten used to working more independently.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you hear stories like the one from that user who was switched from salary to hourly, given a meaningless title change, and then told to come back to the office.
It makes you wonder what the company's real motives are.
It does feel like a bait and switch, you know? Get people back in the office talking about culture and then change their employment to benefit the company.
So we've got this tension then. Companies are pushing for RTO, talking about culture and collaboration, and employees are pushing back, talking about control and flexibility, and even job security. It's like a tug of war.
Yeah, it is. And then it gets even more complicated when you bring in all these hidden economic factors that are at play.
Ooh, that's a great point. And that's actually where we'll pick things up in part 2 of this deep dive.
Looking forward to it. So we were talking about those hidden forces pushing for return to office.
Oh, yeah, like the economic side of things.
Exactly. And one of the biggest factors is commercial real estate.
Yeah, I mean, all those empty office buildings are costing property owners a lot of money.
Right. And it's not just the property owners themselves. Think about all the businesses that depend on people working downtown.
Oh, yeah, like all the restaurants and shops and stuff.
Exactly. The cafes, restaurants, shops, even the public transportation systems.
It's like this chain reaction when everyone went remote. It wasn't just the office landlords who were affected. It was whole local economies.
Exactly. And now you've got governments stepping in, trying to give companies incentives to bring workers back downtown.
Like what kind of incentives?
Well, tax breaks for keeping a physical office, subsidies to encourage people to live in the city, all sorts of things to try and revive those struggling commercial areas.
It's almost like they're trying to go back in time to before the pandemic.
In a way, yeah. But the thing is, work itself has really changed. We've seen that a lot of industries can be really productive with remote work.
And employees got to experience that flexibility and better work-life balance.
Right. Once you've had that, it's hard to go back to the old way of doing things.
So just telling people they have to go back to the office seems kind of out of touch.
Yeah, and it's no wonder that so many employees are pushing back against the long commutes, the micromanaging, and the disruption to their routines.
It's like they're trying to force something that doesn't fit anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if the traditional office is becoming a thing of the past, what are the alternatives? What does the future of work actually look like?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? That trend analysis article did mention a few interesting possibilities.
Yeah. Do you remember what it said?
I think it talked about things like activity-based co-working spaces, and even employee-owned hubs.
Right. Imagine a world where the office isn't a fixed place, but a concept that changes based on what needs to get done.
So instead of being stuck at a desk, you could choose to work in the environment that works best for you.
Exactly. Need to focus on something by yourself. Find a quiet spot, have a big brainstorming session coming up, go to a collaborative space, want to connect with colleagues in a more relaxed way, head to the communal area.
Sounds pretty ideal. A work environment that's actually designed for different people and different ways of working.
And this isn't just a fantasy. Companies are already trying out these ideas. We're seeing these new flexible workspaces popping up that try to cater to all sorts of needs. And some organizations are going fully remote with no central office at all.
Wow, that's a huge change. It must require a whole new way of managing and working together.
It does, and technology is a big part of making this new world of work possible. We're talking virtual reality meeting rooms, sophisticated project management tools, and even AI assistants that help things run smoothly.
It feels like we're on the edge of a massive shift in how we think about work.
We are, and for you, the listener, this is both exciting and challenging. It's a chance to redefine your relationship with work, to find a setup that truly fits your values and goals.
But it also means you have to be proactive,
Yeah.
stay informed, and maybe even be a little brave in asking for what you need.
Absolutely. This isn't just about adapting to change. It's about actively creating the future of work.
That's a great way to put it. But before we get too carried away with all these big ideas, I think it's time to get a little more practical.
You're right. In part 3, we'll talk about some tips and strategies to help you navigate this changing world of work. Whether you're dealing with a return to office mandate or just trying to stay ahead of the curve, we've got some actionable advice for you.
So we've talked about a lot in this deep dive. The anxieties people have about going back to the office, the changing role of chief legal officers with AI, all these economic factors driving RTO. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really shows how everything is connected, doesn't it? Like individual decisions, company policies, the economy, technology, all of that is playing a role in how work is changing.
Totally. But let's make this practical. What can our listener actually do with all this information? Whether they're worried about their company forcing RTO, or they just want to know how to keep their career moving forward. What are the key takeaways?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be informed. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be to handle all these changes.
Right, so stay up to date on what's happening in your industry. Keep an eye on how your company is doing financially, and pay attention to all the conversations about different ways of working.
Exactly. Don't just accept whatever your company tells you. Do your own research, ask questions, and really try to understand why they're making the decisions they're making about RTO.
So don't be passive.
Right. And don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. If you're doing great work remotely, make sure your manager knows that. Show them the data on how productive you are and explain how it benefits the company. Sometimes having those numbers to back you up can be more convincing than just saying how you feel. It does. And even if your company is pushing for everyone to be back in the office full-time, see if you can negotiate a hybrid schedule.
Okay, so maybe you come in for important meetings and collaborative work, but you still have the flexibility to work remotely when you need to focus.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance that works for both the employee and the employer.
So flexibility is key.
Yes. And flexibility isn't just about where you work, but when you work, too. Look into things like flex hours or a compressed work week.
Those can be really helpful for people who have kids to take care of or who just like having more control over their time.
Definitely. And if your current company just isn't willing to budge on these issues, don't be afraid to start looking for a new job. The job market is tough, but there are companies out there that are embracing remote work, flexible arrangements, and cultures that put employees first.
So keep those resumes updated and those LinkedIn profiles polished.
Exactly. This is also a really good time to invest in learning new skills and developing professionally. As technology keeps changing, certain skills are going to become even more valuable.
Like what kind of skills?
Things like data analysis, digital marketing, project management, anything related to AI or automation.
So be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Be willing to adapt and keep learning new things. That's the best way to make sure your career stays strong no matter what happens.
I agree. And remember, this is all part of a bigger discussion about the future of work. It's not just about where we work, but how we work, what work means to us, and how we can make our professional lives more fulfilling and sustainable.
Well said. We hope this deep dive has given you all the information and maybe even some inspiration to confidently navigate this changing world of work. Keep diving deep, everyone.